Well, that was fancy. Hope there's a fly in here. Okay, so, and Maggie, I just told Roxandra this, but Maggie and Bella, same thing. If this is too basic, if you're like, okay, no, I already know how to do these forms, feel free to ask for something in particular, or we'll do a different forms class of maybe the forms that we don't use as often and need more help with. But this one was going to be kind of just like the basic, this is what's in a purchase and sale agreement. So if you haven't done one in a while, it could be a little bit of a brush up, but otherwise, if it feels repetitive and you're like, no, I already know this, you're not going to hurt my feelings by logging off. Okay, so I'm going to try to share my screen. Share screen. Okay, so do you see zip forms open on the internet? Okay, yes. Perfect. So it's not a zip form class. So if you don't use zip forms and you want to know how, let me know and I'll get you set up with this. This is how I fill out my paperwork. So in zip forms, I've got my template created here. So under templates, because I'm dual licensed and my computer is in slow motion today. So that's when you log into zip forms, you get your dashboard. Under my templates, I've got a Washington single family residential PSA, and I've got all of my documents in that template for writing an offer. So I don't have to think about what documents do I need to pull. I just go to my template and they're all there.
Is there a way that you can send that to any of us?
I don't know if you can share a template in here, but I can tell you what forms are in it, and then you can just create a template in your zip form account.
That would be awesome too.
Okay, so those are the forms that I was going to go over. So I'm not going to do a mock sale. Okay. I'm just going to pull up the forms. So if I'm writing a purchase and sale, and I'm going to get rid of the people part. Okay. If you use zip forms, as opposed to creating your own folder on your computer, the benefit is the forms are always up to date. Zip forms is pulling them right out of Northwest MLS. So if a form gets changed and updated, it automatically gets changed and updated when it pulls it into your template. It's pulling them in live, as opposed to a lot of people will create a folder on their desktop and say, well, here are all the forms I need, and I'll just reuse them. Jenna just recently had one where they're like, you used old forms. And she's like, it's because I've written so many offers for these people. We started writing offers on the old forms. And she was just like putting in new information each time. And now the listing agent is like, yep, you have to rewrite it on new forms. So that's, you know, that's the cautionary tale of if you're not pulling live forms every time. So,
Shanna, I have a question.
Yes.
And I apologize if it's a dumb question, but
no, you're good.
Is there any, like, what's the benefit of doing it on zip forms instead of just going to Northwest MLS and doing the autofill and then selecting which ones you want? You know what I mean?
Well, here you don't have to select because you can have the template ready to go.
Okay.
So they're already pulled in. I have an issue with Northwest MLS, and I don't know if it's because of the kind of computer I use or not, but I have very many times filled out all of my documents on Northwest MLS and saved them and gone back and they're blank.
Oh my gosh, you know why? Because you're saving the file.
I know, and you have to print it. You have to print it.
Yeah, I've done that so many times too. Yeah, it's maddening.
Yeah, so that's why that got me away from Northwest MLS. Even though I knew what to do, every now and then you forget and you just save your stuff. So that's super frustrating. So, and zip forms is free. You get a zip forms account. So I find it to be the easiest way. But again, I'm not selling zip forms today. So
I thought it was an extra cost for some reason. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, so but I can help you get it set up when you're ready if you decide you want to. So what I've got in here for a basic Washington deal, the ones that say ZFX are pulling in live from Zip Forms. But then I also have my buyer service agreement and the anti-fraud that I might want somebody to sign. So those I added in as PDFs. But for a purchase and sale in Washington, it's not on a well, it's not on septic, it's not acreage, it's not a condo, it's just a regular family home in a neighborhood. This is my complete package right here of everything that I need filled out. And then just a quick forms review for the people that are here for that. Okay, so Form 21 is your purchase and sale agreement. Does anybody have any questions, particularly about this form? Otherwise, I'm just going to zip through it. Okay.
My only question on that is, if you put in a bunch of addenda and then you submit the offer and then you had forgotten an addenda, is it okay to add another addenda without listing it on line number 16? Or do all the addenda you send over have to be on line 16?
They need to be on line 16. So you can always add it and then have everybody initial it.
Okay.
So say, yeah, you write an offer and they say, well, we'll accept your offer if you add a 22 AD. And so you write a 22 AD, then you need to add in here 22 AD and everybody initial it if the offer gets signed around. Also, and Karen is here in the office. We can't see her, but she's sitting on the couch. And she brought up a really good point. What is listed here on the addenda is, and for me, it's going to be the financials, the optional clauses, the utilities, title, inspection. And I haven't added it in yet, but I need to, because Annie Fitzsimmons wants everybody using the FERPTA form, which is that a 22E, I think is the number for it. But again, you also might be getting that from the seller side. We'll talk about that in a minute. But so on my offer, those are the things that I'm going to include with it. I'm also going to include the Exhibit A and the seller's disclosures if they were on the listing, but I'm not putting them here. They're not part of my purchase and sale agreement. What is listed here on Form 20, I'm pointing to my monitor, like you can see me like pointing to the lines. What is listed there in section 16 on line 16 goes to the lender. So don't send the lender the seller disclosures. You don't send it to title and escrow to open. Like, this is telling you what is part of this contract that needs to go to the parties involved. The only thing that ever gets added that has to go out to everybody is the 35R. And if you don't know, I'm throwing out form numbers, and I know some people are kind of newer and don't know them. That's the inspection response form. So let's just keep it basic form fill out though. Form 21 is your residential purchase and sale agreement. It's 6 pages long. The only page you have to fill out is page 1. Pages 4, 5, and 6, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all just telling you what's on page 1. So if you ever feel like I really want to know line by line how to explain this to my client, you go through here. It gives you everything. It explains all of it.
And WMLS does a good job too.
And yeah, if you go to Northwest MLS and pull the forms manual, that I'll show you how to do that if you need it. Also very comprehensive. But the 6-page document, you've got 1 page to fill out and you need to be complete with it. So date is the date you're filling it out, today's date. MLS number you're going to get from the MLS. And if it's a for sale by owner or a not listed, you can just indicate that here. Expiration date is when you want the seller to respond by. Buyer's name and seller's names. If you don't know the seller's name, if it's not listed on the listing, you go to the GIS or you click the tax ID number in RMLS, get the legal name of the sellers.
Buyers' names from their driver's license.
And get the buyer's names off their driver's license. I always ask my clients, give me your full legal name as it would appear on a legal document. That doesn't always work. I got to closing with a client who had told me her name was Rusty, and that was a nickname. She filled out everything as Rusty, even after I said your legal name as it would appear.
Yeah.
And at title, we had to do an addendum because her name wasn't actually Rusty. So as you're going through zip forms, you've got your date, your buyer, your seller, your property legal description attached as Exhibit A. So again, Exhibit A comes from title or from the seller. Parcel number is going to be in the MLS. You're checking the items you want them to leave behind. Purchase price is the price you're offering. Earnest money is the amount of earnest money your client's going to deposit at escrow. They've got, this is new, blank days after mutual acceptance. It used to be 2 days. And if you used a promissory note addendum, it was 3 days. There is no reason to use a promissory note. You do not need a promissory note. This covers it right here. So if you want 3 days, put 3 days. So the delivery date is however many days you indicate after mutual acceptance. It's always to be held by the closing agent. You and me, we're the buyer brokerage firm, and we don't have a trust account to hold client money. So it's always held by the closing agent. And you always need to indicate whether your client is going to do a check or a wire. My clients, I usually don't know if they want to do a check or a wire. I usually go other and put check or wire. It'll probably pop right up. Yeah. Yeah. Check or wire, wire or check. That way they can decide when they talk to the title company. They can decide what's going to be easier. Title and escrow in our state in Washington is the same company. So your title insurance company, you're going to put Chicago, Stewart, WFG, whoever you're using. Closing agent is that same company. So this is the company name. And then if you have an individual preference who work there, that goes here. Closing date, you're getting from your lender. The lender is going to tell you I can close it in 30 days. I need 45. And then possession is either on closing or at some other time. On closing means 9 p.m. of whatever date is right here. 9 p.m. Your clients do not get the keys when the paperwork is done. They get the keys at 9 p.m. on the day of closing, unless you indicate otherwise. So other, right here, you can put 5 p.m. day of closing. You can put 2 weeks after close because you're doing a rent back. You can, it's open, but possession and closing are not the same thing. Services of a closing agent for payment of utilities. We're going to talk more about Form 22K. But if you're not going to use the 22K and you're not going to have it filled out, then waive it. But if you're going to use it, fill it out. Most people want to use it. So that is saying that we're going to have the closing agent, which is your title or escrow person, pay the final utility bills out of the proceeds at closing. So they're going to pay the utility bills for the seller before your buyer takes possession. Charges and assessments levied before but due after closing. So if your client has a bill that we're closing on June 10th, and they have a bill from the month, they have a tax bill or a sum charge levied against them from February that's due in July. So it's not due yet, but we still want it paid in full by seller at closing. So it's an old charge, but it's not due until after closing. We want it paid at closing. Citizenship. Seller is or is not a foreign person for purpose of U.S. income taxation. So that is indicated on the MLS. There's a box that'll say FERPTA, yes or no. So you can check that. Some people are like, well, I need the seller to check that. Well, you can also rely on the information that they put in the listing. It is fine if they are a foreign person for purposes of U.S. income taxation. It just has to be reported because there are tax implications that go with that. So it's not a huge red flag. Like, I'm not going to let my client buy this house because the seller is subject to FERPTA. You can still go forward with the transaction. You just need to be aware of the tax ramifications. And then agency disclosure, buyer represented by the buyer's broker, seller represented by the listing broker, or dual agent or unrepresented. So when I go in for compliance to check people's forms to make sure we have everything, here's what I do. So for you in your zip form account, this is already going to be filled out if you've got your zip forms set up to autofill. I pay extra, I pay zip forms for something that's an MLS Connect, so that when I put in the MLS number, it fills in the other side for me as well. You don't have to do that. You can fill it in yourself, but it needs to be complete. So when I get your purchase and sale agreement in SkySlope, here's what I'm looking for. I make sure it was signed on both sides. And then I count 9 boxes. I need 9 lines of checks, which are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There has to be something checked for every one of those lines. So I go up, I count 9 boxes. I make sure it's the right address, and I don't nitpick over. I don't go in and check if you got the tax ID number right. Like I'm not here to micromanage your forms. I'm just here to make sure we don't get fined if we get audited. So if all of this is filled out, I'm not going to go in and make sure the MLS number is right. I'm assuming that you got it right. I don't go in and see if that house had a built-in microwave or not, and whether you checked it. That's on you to check your appliances. I make sure that we have a box checked on every line, and that all of the fill-ins are filled out. So that is Form 21 in a nutshell. And then I scroll through and make sure you've got buyer and seller initials on every page. Does anybody have any questions about that so far? Okay. So Form 21, I'm going to, because this is my template and I like to keep it blank so I can use it again, I'm going to take out what I typed and save it and go back. Okay. 99% of the deals, well, I guess not 99% anymore, but most of the deals you do are not cash. If it's all cash, you don't need a finance addendum. If they're using a mortgage, you need a finance addendum. If you're using zip forms, this top part will already be filled out, because once you put in a buyer and you put in a seller and you put in an address, it auto populates it to all your forms. Finance addendum is a really quick one to fill out. What kind of loan are they using? Conventional, bridge, VA, FHA, etc. And then what is their down payment going to be? Either the dollar amount or a percentage. New to the finance addendum since the update this year in 2021 is the financing contingency section. Seller's notice to perform. So you're going to want to check that and not waive it. If you don't fill this section out, it defaults to seller's notice to perform. Okay, so even if you forget to check something, you can't accidentally waive it, but you may as well just check here. This is what used to be the default in the old appraisal, in the old finance addendum. So now you're actually having to check a box. And then appraisal less than sale price will or will not constitute waiver of the finance addendum. We usually do the will not, and it defaults to will not if you don't check a box. So really all you're filling out on here is the loan type, the down payment, seller's notice to perform, will not waive. And then if your buyer is asking for closing cost, that goes here. And that is it. That is all they're filling out on these 3 pages, and initials on every page. Anybody have any questions about the finance addendum?
I've got a question. Do you repeat the closing cost credit on the standard addendum, or is this the only place you usually list it?
If I'm, and in case you couldn't hear Karen, she wanted to know if my buyer is asking for closing costs right here, do I also put that on another addendum? I don't, but I've seen people that do.
A lot of sellers miss it, that's why.
Yeah, that's on their
That's
agent.
exactly
Yeah,
what I was
a
getting
lot
at.
of times somebody will accept the offer and then they'll be like, oh, we didn't see that you wanted 5,000 in closing costs. Well,
Yeah, it's so sad.
that's between you and your agent for not reviewing the forms because it was clearly in the place where it was supposed to be.
Perfect answer.
Yeah, some people will put it on a form 34. I don't. I only put something on a form 34 for extra attention if I really want them to see it. Like we shortened the inspection period to 5 days, or we're not asking, you know, it's for informational purposes only. Okay, so that is the finance addendum. Optional clauses is like the most random form in the history of legal documents, but it is what it is. It'll be auto-filled on the top if you use zip forms. Always check the first box. It's just saying that neither of the agents have conducted a survey, have measured the building, have looked at the property lines. We're all going based on the information that we've pulled from where? From the GIS, from old listings, from the seller's representations. So you don't want to be called to task because, well, you were my trusted professional and you should have known that that fence was in the wrong spot. If you're not doing a survey, you're not going to know that. I mean, that's a title issue. So always check that first box. Never check anything on the second box. Title insurance is not optional. It is required. It is going to happen. The seller is going to pay for it. It will default to the current Alta form of homeowner's policy of title insurance. The normal default title insurance is happening. If you check standard owner's coverage, then the seller gets to give you a cheaper coverage. If you check extended coverage, then the seller is giving you at their expense a more comprehensive coverage. The only time I've ever done the extended coverage is if, first of all, in this market, I wouldn't do it because I'm not going to ask the seller for anything extra if I'm trying really hard to get accepted in a multiple offer situation. But you're going to pay the extended. So the seller is going to have to get you the more expensive policy, but the buyer will have to pick up the difference in the price. And from talking to title people, and feel free, like make a coffee date with your favorite title person and pick their brain about this because it's not my area of expertise. But what I have learned in asking title people is that there's not much benefit to the extended coverage unless you're worried about something in particular with this property. I sold a house to a woman named Amy Lopez, one of the most high maintenance clients I've ever had in my entire life. And she bought this little house and there were like 6 houses for sale. And they were each on their own legal tax lot, but it had been grandma's house and a bunch of aunts and uncles' houses on one big lot at one point. And they had legally had the lots divided. So it was a very easy, no problem. We didn't have to deal with any of that. It was already done. It was a single family home on a lot. But because when they did that, the aunts and uncles all still lived there, none of the fence lines matched the property lines. Like we make this is the tax lot, but Aunt Millie, who's your backdoor neighbor, doesn't want to mow a yard. So I'm going to take this fence and put it right on the back of her house so that you have a really big yard. And that was their agreement. Well, those fences were there for 30 years. And so when we came in, we brought it to title to say, like, we want this like really in detail. We don't want to have to pay for a survey if we don't have to, because surveys are expensive. But they went out with the buyer, Amy, her husband went out with the metal detector to find the markers from when it had all been done. So There are times when things are a little weird and you might want the extended coverage, but talk to your tax person. And that's a great, not tax, to your title person. And that's just a great check-in point. Like, have a coffee with Lauren Yost or with, one of the title gals and just say, hey, I want to pick your brain about this so that I know how to inform my clients. Okay. Seller cleaning, personal property, and utilities. I have them checked by default because I always check them. If this were like say an as is, we know we're going to get it full of junk, I can go in and uncheck it. But those are pretty much, I always ask that it's cleaned, that they take their shit with them when they move out, and that they don't cancel the utilities. So very basic information. Insulation is only for new construction. Leased property, it tells you what the most common ones are: propane tank, security system, satellite dish. A lot of times those security systems, the bill for that is going to be attached to the house, not to the person. So like ADT, they do all those specials where it's like, we'll come in and we'll hook up your security system, we'll wire your house, it's all free, all the equipment is free, and you just pay the $50 a month for monitoring. So if that has happened and there's a 2-year agreement for that monitoring, ADT doesn't care if one person moves out and another person moves in. They will have the right to put a lien on the property. So these are things we want to know. Is that something that's going to happen? And the buyer may say, no, that's fine, I want the security monitoring. But if they don't want it, then that's something we're going to want the seller to figure out how to get out of that contract before we buy it. Same thing out in, I've seen it a lot in Ridgefield, but I think Ridgefield has now gotten, I don't know if they've gotten natural gas out there or not, but I know at one point there was no natural gas in Ridgefield, and all of these big, beautiful houses that had gas stoves, and it was all on buried propane tanks. Well, when the seller sells that house and moves out, the buyer is going to need to use the propane that's in that tank and continue that commitment. So that's what leased property period and assumption are. Just finding out what your buyer is going to be on the hook for when they buy that property. Homeowners Association, if there's an HOA, check 8 and check 9. If there's not an HOA, you can skip it. There's a lot in there. There's a whole, we can talk more about what you should get from an HOA at a different time, but we're just doing forms right now. So if there's a homeowners association, check these boxes. Excluded items can be weird, varied, and random. It could be there's a play structure in the yard and my clients don't want it. So we're going to ask them to take the play structure with them, though normally they would have left it. I've actually had a client put the carpet on excluded items, the carpet in the house. They were coming in with hardwoods and they wanted the buyer to pull up the carpet and dispose of it and not have it be at the seller's expense. So excluded items are anything you don't want them to leave that they would normally leave. If your client's coming in with all new appliances, you can ask the buyer to take the old appliances, like even the dishwasher that they were going to leave, have them take it with them so you don't have to pay to get rid of it. Again, in a multiple offer situation, I'm not going to ask for any of this, but back in a normal market where you have a little back and forth. And then the last 2 items, the home warranty, buyer and seller acknowledge that a home warranty plan can be a benefit, blah, blah, blah. If there's going to be a home warranty on the house going forward past the date of sale, then we need to know who, what, and when, what it's covering, what they're paying, who's paying for it. A lot of agents, I know Betsy likes to buy home warranties for her clients as her closing gift. So that's just something that you can indicate right here, that the home warranty seller, home warranty provider, let's just say Old Republic, seller to pay 0, other buyer's agent Betsy Ecke will be paying for the home warranty. So it's just a pretty easy place to throw it in. If you don't do it here and you decide toward the end, like sometimes I don't decide on a home warranty until after the inspection is done. You can always come back with that on an addendum if you don't do it here. And then other, is other. It's it's just a place to put random stuff, but I wouldn't put something that was super important here for fear that it would be missed. If it was very important, I would put it on a Form 34. But I've seen a lot of people using other to say home inspection for informational purposes only, buyer will not ask seller for repairs. So you can put that here, but I like to put that on a Form 34 because I think it's important and it's a powerful addition to your offer. So I'd like to see it get a little more attention. Does anybody have any questions about optional clauses? Okay, the last biggie is the inspection addendum, which did change in 2021. It used to have a box that you were waiving the inspection. Now that's a separate form. So if you're waiving the inspection, you have a separate form to do that on. So this is the contingency saying that we are doing an inspection. You need to indicate if it may or may not include a sewer scope. And it defaults to 10 days of inspection period. That's 10 calendar days. If you want to be competitive, you can lower that to 5 days, 3 days, whatever you can do, depending on if you have an inspector lined up and ready to go. Seller consent. The seller has to agree that they want to see the report or they want to see sections of the report. Super important new lockdown on the inspection report. If you, as the buyer's agent, send the listing agent any portion of the report without them asking for it, you have just waived your inspection contingency. And if you don't know what that means, it means your buyer has the house as is, and they no longer have an avenue to get their earnest money back if they don't want it based on inspection. All of these default to 3 days. If you're making a request, the seller has 3 days to respond. 3 days prior to closing is when the repairs should be done. And then if you check this box for the neighborhood review contingency, then that means that you have 3 days to change your mind because you don't like the neighborhood after reviewing the neighborhood. But I think it's redundant because that 3 days is not in addition to your inspection contingency. It's already part of it. So it's just, I had an offer rejected and I said, what could we have done better? And he says, well, you had the neighborhood review. I'm like, okay, that's kind of pointless, but I don't check it anymore. Anybody have questions about the inspection addendum? Okay. Utilities. The seller fills this out. A good listing agent, which I know all of you are good listing agents, will fill it out and have it on the RMLS with your Exhibit A and your disclosures. It is it's going to title. This is the form that you had the option on your Form 21 to waive it or use it. If you're using it, fill it in. If you don't fill it in, so this is per Annie Fitzsimmons, because we see these blank all the time. People just don't fill it in. If the title company is supposed to pay the final utility bills and the title company is 99% perfect at getting that done. But if they accidentally somehow don't pay that final electric bill and it's not indicated in here who they were supposed to pay it to anyway, then that falls back on the buyer and the buyer's agent for not having provided the complete information. Again, 99.9% of the time, even if this is blank, title will get it right. But in the event that they get it wrong and this has not been completed, then it's back on the buyer. The buyer is stuck with that electric bill. And who are they going to call when they're pissed about that? They're calling their buyer's agent. This also, If the above information has not been filled in at the time of mutual agreement, then within 5 days, the seller shall provide the names and addresses of all utility providers having lien rights affecting the property. And this is the important part. Buyer and seller authorize listing broker or buyer broker to insert into this addendum the names and addresses of the utility providers. So if you're the buyer's agent, the seller agent doesn't fill this out, go on the GIS and fill it out yourself. This is the one form that can be signed around, and you can go in and add the information without having to send it around and get initials on everything. Right here, the buyer and seller have already authorized either agent to finish filling this form out. So there's no reason not to fill it out. Anybody have any questions about the utility addendum? Okay, I have thrown in the title contingency here. Like I literally went into my template last night and threw this in. I don't usually use this, but I'm seeing people use it more and more and more. Title contingency addendum to the purchase and sale agreement. The purchase and sale agreement, Form 21, by virtue of the contract, already indicates that the seller has to have a marketable title. So that's what the title search does. They just make sure that the seller has the appropriate title and ability to sell this house, and that it's titled properly. Title contingency gives you 5 additional days after you get well, you have to check a box. Okay, so you get 5 days and you check the box for the date of buyer's receipt of preliminary commitment for title insurance. So when you get the preliminary title report, you get 5 days starting from then to determine if there's a title issue that causes you to not want the property. If you check the box from mutual acceptance, then it's 5 days starting from when the contract is signed around. And really it becomes a moot point because you're already in your inspection window. So you already have an out. That's why I don't usually use this form. The only thing that was ever explained to me about marketable title. So this addendum does not relieve the seller of the obligation to provide marketable title. So they're already committed to a good title. What this can cover is if, yes, the property is marketable, it is a good title, it can be bought and sold, but it can't be used for the specific purpose that your client is buying it.
What number is it? Number.
22T. It can't be used. So it is a marketable title. It is fine, but it can't be used for the specific purpose that your client wanted to buy it. That's where the title contingency addendum gives them that 5-day period to determine that and have an out and the ability to cancel and get their earnest money back. I don't have any good examples of what kind of issue would be covered by that. If anybody.
Like if you're gonna do a daycare and you find out the zoning doesn't allow it.
Right, but is that gonna be on title?
Well, the restrictions to the property could
Yeah.
be.
So what Karen said was, so if you were buying that property because you wanted to open a daycare center and you find out zoning wise, you can't do in-home care with the CCNRs or whatever reason, the HOA. So that would be, again, for me, I try to have my clients do all that due diligence under the umbrella of the inspection period anyway. So this does not give you additional days unless you check the box, the date of the receipt of the preliminary title commitment, which you usually get like after the earnest money is deposited and you get the report within a couple of days of that. Hey, Bella, unmute yourself so we can hear your question. Okay, we can hear. I see you're unmuted, but I can't hear you.
I'm unmuted.
Okay, now I can hear you. Okay.
Okay. So who a title company on the close because there were extra errors uncovered, and it
I lost you. We were getting every other word and then it completely cut out. But if you want to type it in the chat, I'll read your question because I can't hear you. I see that you're unmuted, but I still can't hear you. Let me do this. Darn it. I'm not sure if it's just a bad connection, but we're not hearing anything from you. But again, this contingency, I don't usually include the title contingency because we're usually still within our inspection period, but I would love to hear what your experience was, Bella, with having to use this. Okay, does anybody else have anything on title contingency? Okay, then the two additional, I don't know why we call these trailing documents. That's what we call them at Berkshire Hathaway, and so that's what I still call them. So the trailing docs are the buyer service agreement, the anti-fraud disclosure, law of agency, agency disclosure, and the inspector referral. None of these go with your offer, but they're all things that you need to have signed by your buyer. So we've got a buyer service agreement. Mine is pre-signed and pre-filled out. I have mine set as a commission is set forth in the RMLS or negotiated with the FSBO seller. Other agents have that set at 3%. And if the selling side is offering 2.25, they ask their buyer to kick in the 0.75. That's a whole nother class. But because I know people who do it and nobody bats an eye. But yeah, so buyer service agreement, this one is not a mandatory form. If you are comfortable working with your buyers without an agreement, that is up to you. So, but I have that one tossed in here for signature. Bring it back up again. I've had some, I think it might've been Bella that I was talking to who said, I've been told it's not worth the paper it's printed on. And in a court of law, you're probably right. A client can choose to work with whoever they want to. And I always tell my buyers when they're signing this, I'm like, believe me, I've never had to chase anybody down the street waving my buyer service agreement saying, but wait, you're my client. But it does give, a little bit more sense of loyalty. So if this buyer goes to an open house, and let's just say that it's Nathan Cano, who has done this to me before, is doing that open house, and he says to the client, are you working with an agent? Because he'll offer them a sweetheart deal to double end. He's a little slimy, but the first thing they'll ask is, have you signed the client says, yep, I've got an agent, I'm working with somebody. The first thing that type of agent who's trying to poach a client will say is, have you signed anything? So whether this would hold up in a court of law or not, it will give a decent human being of a buyer a moment of pause to say, yeah, actually I have, I'm good, I've got a commitment here. It really doesn't obligate the buyer to owe you anything. But if you have a signed around buyer service agreement and you've shown that buyer a house at 123 Main Street, and then they go and write an offer on 123 Main Street with a different agent, you can use this with that agent to negotiate at least a referral fee or a split on the commission, because that agent should have done their due diligence to know that they are not the procuring cause for that purchase and that you've already done the legwork. So that's where a buyer service agreement, I use it. Not everybody does. We haven't made it a mandatory form because some people are like, I just don't want to have my clients sign anything. And that's cool. That's up to you. The anti-fraud disclosure is a required form. This is our in-house fraud disclosure. There's also one in Northwest MLS. You need to put in the title and escrow person because that's the point. The point is that you're saying, I'm putting it in writing, do not give out any information, trust me and trust this title and escrow person. And I see a lot of people doing this blank. And if you don't fill out the title and escrow and your client somehow falls victim to some kind of earnest money scam, then you do not have the protection of having warned them and advised them to only respond to that person. Does that make sense? Like leaving this blank does not constitute having given them the disclosure.
And have you talked about not using public Wi-Fi at Starbucks? Because that's where most of the fraud has happened, at public Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and if your client is doing any of their paperwork or their back and forth with you or with anybody on the deal using public Wi-Fi, that's where they become a greater source of an easier victim for any of that kind of fraud. And the fraudsters are really good and really convincing. And this has happened in Clark County, where clients have wired funds
To the same agent twice.
to the internet, never to be seen again, but it sure as shit didn't go toward the deposit on their house. Law of agency, this is required by law to go out to every person doing a real estate transaction with an agent. So if you're working with a client, you have to give them this pamphlet. You can get it initialed, you can get it signed. If you use Form 42, that also constitutes the receipt. The undersigned buyer or seller acknowledges receipt of the law of agency pamphlet. So if you use Form 42, then you don't have to have them initial the actual pamphlet. I definitely want you to use Form 42 is not required if you have them initial the pamphlet, but if you're doing dual agency, Form 42 is required so that we have a document that very clearly states the broker represents both sides and that both sides signed a document together acknowledging that. We have had that come up in the short little tenure of this brokerage where an agent was doing dual agency, and in the 11th hour, the seller claimed, I had no idea you were representing the buyer and I feel like I'm getting ripped off. So this is a very easy, clear document for disclosing dual agency. We have a few places to disclose it, but definitely use the Form 42 if you're doing dual agency, or if it's a for sale by owner, you need to provide that seller, the unrepresented seller, with a copy of the law of agency and have them sign that you are representing the buyer only and have them acknowledge that. Does anybody have any questions about law of agency or agency disclosure? Okay, and the last one in here is not a required form, and mine is filled out because I always make the same referrals. It's not a required form, but I definitely encourage it because it's a very CYA form, which is your inspector referral disclosure. If you're going to recommend a home inspector, recommend more than one and make sure that you document this, that your buyer is making the decision of who they're using as a home inspector. And I've had that happen. We had a home inspector say there were no, it wasn't termites, it was carpenter ants, because we don't really get a lot of termites. Anyway, as part of the home inspection, he indicated no evidence of any kind of pest issue. And then when my buyers moved in, they had carpenter ants on a huge degree, and they were mad that they had this inspection report saying that they didn't have any issue. And they ended up, dealing with the home inspector on that. But their first response is, your guy, to me, to Shanna, your guy screwed us over. And so I want to make sure that it's very clear, like, he's not my guy. I got 3 guys. You picked a guy. He's your guy now. So it is just very much, you don't want to get in a situation where you have a buyer who says, well, you picked the guy, you did this, all I did was sign and go along. You want to make sure you have buyers making their own choices. And this is just one more form along those lines. And the only other thing that I have in my template, which is for after the inspection, is your inspection response, Form 35R, where you're letting the seller know what was found on inspection. It's either inspection is good, we're moving forward, contingency is over. Inspection was horrible, we're terminating, give me back my earnest money, contingency over. Buyer gives notice of additional inspection. That's the third option. And that one is, the home inspector said, I need a roof specialist, so I'm asking for 5 more days to get the roof inspected. If you do that, it's a notice, it's not a request. So you're filling out on all 3 of those, on we're moving forward, we're terminating, or we're asking for an additional response. Those are all notices. They're not a two-way street. We're letting you know, seller, what's happening. So you do not need to get this signed and returned by the seller. And it tells you that right here. All 3 of those have a little star, star, star. And 1 star means this is a notice which requires only 1 buyer or 1 seller signature. So it doesn't go back and forth. You can move forward, you can pull out, or you can have 5 more days for additional inspection without the seller agreeing to it. The last one is, we want you to do something for us. And that's where we're asking the seller for repairs, for modifications, for a cost reduction, etc. That one, the seller has to agree to or respond to. Also, remember that no response is a no. So if you make a request and the listing agent never gets this back to you, that's a no. And your buyer has to decide, am I moving forward or not, as is. When your buyer makes that request, it is not terminating the deal. It is not making it contingent upon, I'm only moving forward if you fix X, Y, and Z. It's asking for X, Y, and Z. If the seller doesn't respond or says no, the deal is still under contract and moving forward as written. So you have to keep an eye on, when you submit this over to the listing side, if they don't give you a response by the end of their 3 days, you need to be ready to terminate if that's what your buyer wants to do. On day 5, if you still haven't gotten a response and your buyer says, well, I don't want the house if they're not going to fix X, Y, and Z, it's too late. They won't get their earnest money back. So that is the most important timeline to watch in this whole back and forth. If the seller agrees to what the buyer is asking for, the buyer still has to accept. So none of these, so if seller agrees, that's not a notice. You can see there's 1 star and 2 star. 1 star means nobody has to respond. 2 stars means somebody has to respond. So if the seller agrees to all modifications, then the buyer needs to accept and say, okay, we're moving forward. If the seller rejects all proposals by the buyer and just says, no, we're not doing anything, then the buyer does not need to respond to that on this form. the buyer needs to either terminate or move forward or propose an alternate. So does anybody have any questions about this one? All right, well, does anybody have any questions in general about the purchase and sale forms? Again, this was for a very basic, straightforward transaction. The next time we get together for a forms class, we're going to talk about the forms that we don't always use that we need to know about, like the 22AD, the 22B, the septic, the well. This was just a quick overview. Well, it wasn't quick because it took me an hour of the basic purchase and sale transaction forms. And it's been 58 minutes, so I'm going to stop talking because I'm done hearing myself talk. Does anybody have any questions or comments or anything? Other than Karen falling off the couch. Okay, well, that's it. Bella, I'm trying to, let me stop my screen share so I can get to see if you put anything in the comments. Or Betsy, can you check that for me? Did Bella put her, because she was trying to talk and I couldn't hear her.
She did not. I don't see anything.
Okay, so Bella, we can connect later and you can let me know. Because
And
I was not able to hear you when you were talking about the title contingency. So,
just so you know, I couldn't hear her either. It came in and out.
okay.
So it's obviously something within like the entire system.
Okay, so something was wrong with our connection.
I couldn't hear anything either, so.
You're
Okay.
getting lots of thank yous.
Oh, this is
Okay.
Karen, by
Oh,
the
I
way.
got in there now.
I'm
Okay.
using my daughter's on accident, so it's Cameron.
Hi.
Hi, I just was saying I couldn't hear either, but yeah, I didn't know if you saw my face before, but
I
yeah,
did.
sorry.
Roxandra and Melinda both said thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I recorded it because we have a couple of new people who couldn't log in and wanted to talk about forms. So next time we'll go over some of the different forms beyond the basics. All right, I'll talk to you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.